Hey everyone, my name is Charlie and today I have my rankings and reviews for the second round of the Booktube Prize. For this round I was judging Group C. I went back and watched my previous video and I will leave a link to that in the description. I have decided that I will follow the same format as that, in that I am going to list the books that I had to read in alphabetical order by author's surname, and then I will give you my reviews of the books as I read them before going into my rankings and then discussing how my judging corresponded with the final results for this round. The books that I had to read for this round were Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams, The Beekeeper of Aleppo by Christy Lefteri, A Woman is No Man by Etaf Rum, Olive Again by Elizabeth Strout, The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, and Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. I went about the second round the same way I went with the first round, which was to read the books I was most excited for first and then get to the ones that I just didn't have much feeling towards. So the first book that I read was Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. Unfortunately, I did not like this book. This book follows Melody and Melody's mother, seemingly. Really explores the family dynamic of this working class black family in Brooklyn. There's something to do with a unexpected pregnancy, which was Melody's mother. This is a very fast book to read. It's quite short, which also contributes to that. Jacqueline Woodson writes in a very clear, crisp manner. The writing doesn't do anything wrong. However, after about 100 pages, I realised that for 100 pages, nothing had really happened where the story begins, really, with Melody in 2001. Everyone's just been watching her come down the stairs for about 100 pages, and we've gone in and out of everyone's lives, their thoughts, what's gone on in the past. I just didn't like it. I like short books. I like brevity. I like when, as much as I like long books, I like when a writer is able to tell the full story, no matter how long the book is. Sometimes you'll think it's too long, sometimes you'll think it's too short. I want to read part of the blurb, which says that unfurling the history of Melody's family from the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre to post 9/11 New York. I don't think Red at the Bone actually discusses those things. I think that it uses them as place markers for the reader who ought to know about these things to then get an impression of the characters. And I didn't like that. I didn't like that as the reader we were expected to create the character for ourselves in some way just by the mention of these historical events. I just don't think that it was particularly well drawn. I felt like it was a good synopsis of a story, and it was quite good at jumping in and out of people's lives to try and create some sort of patchwork narrative of a story. But I did not enjoy that. I am discussing this book now, nearly 2 months after reading it, and all I remember is everybody waiting on this staircase. I appreciate tales of family, we know that. I just feel like there were a lot of stories that wanted to be told in this book, so that the focus became lost. I found it difficult to get a clear definition of what the writer was trying to get at. Then I read Olive Again by Elizabeth Strout. I actually read Olive Kitteridge first because this is a sequel, and this, similar to the first book, is a collection of short stories about this community in Maine, but Olive Kitteridge will be part of the story in some way. She is an older woman who is quite acerbic. Sometimes I can get annoyed with what I call this pretentious voice that I commonly associate with American writers. It's very much MA creative writing, and you get this same sort of style popularised by Raymond Carver back in the day, and I've even seen it with Alice Munro. And I feel like sometimes that can take away the heart of a story. Here I felt like there was enough of the writer in the voice that there was something individual about it. Whilst I liked the first book and would revisit it, I don't feel the same way about Olive Again. I feel, in a similar fashion to Red at the Bone, that this is a lot of disparate pieces that somehow don't really fit together. However, What I appreciated was the writing here, and the writing meant that I ranked this higher in my estimations. I just really liked reading Elizabeth Strout's words. Here is an issue that I did have with it because of the way that this novel is told through this form of short stories. Big life events for Olive will happen, and it will just be given one sentence, so that the reader just has to accept it and move on. But it could be that this thing has related to a character we've grown close to, and we aren't given that time to gain any sort of resolution or have any of our questions answered as to how this happened to that character. It also means that there's no build-up, that it throws out any sort of traditional form of storytelling in favour of just dipping in and out of these characters' lives. I think that this was a great book at loneliness in the older population, but I do think that Elizabeth Strout relied heavily on cliches and tropes in order to keep this story moving forward, and I don't think there was anything very original in this book. Unlike Olive Kitteridge that I could see myself rereading, I could only see myself revisiting this because I'd read Olive Kitteridge and I appreciate Elizabeth Strout's prose. The writer can write, but sometimes that's not enough for me as a reader to remain invested. This was one where I'd hoped I could read it and accept the faults of the story, but still enjoy it and call it a favourite, and that sadly is not the case. Next, I read Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams. I have seen this book doing the rounds. I have seen some people compare this book to Bridget Jones's Diary, which I've never read. I've seen some people compare it to women's contemporary fiction. Again, we have a book that I didn't particularly like. Everything is going wrong in Queenie's life, but because we are in her head, we as readers have to accept everything she's doing, despite the fact that we as readers might know it's a bit weird that she's exhibiting these behaviours. And similar to Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine. I think that what Queenie did well was it included us in the character's head, but we didn't know what was wrong with the character. We just knew that there was something wrong. And as with these books, there has to be a bit of a breakdown before a character can build themselves up again. There was a book in the first round of the Booktube Prize, Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. And I think that if you'd read that, you would enjoy Queenie. I think that similar to that, I think that if you're a young adult reader who wants to get into reading adult fiction, this would be a good gateway book. It moves quickly. It led to me asking myself a lot of questions about literature. There was a lot of text messaging in this and emailing going on in here, and I was thinking about how I don't really like that in fiction, but then I was thinking, but if you were reading classic fiction and they were sending letters to one another, then I'd accept it more. And I don't really like that. And I understood how it worked, and what I'd say that I appreciated about this book was the fact that it had very strong female friendships at its core, but at the same time it felt very like a light drama. I didn't feel like it was polished enough. I feel as though it just needed to be made somewhat stronger. I'd have reduced the amount of characters in here so that it wouldn't get so distracting. I'd have tried to create some sort of clear focus, similar to Red at the Bone. I just feel like it lacked this focus. Unfortunately, I didn't like it. And that is going to be the theme continuing throughout, but I will discuss that later on. The next book that I read was The Beekeeper of Aleppo by Christy Lefteri. Nori, a beekeeper, is fleeing Syria with his wife, and this book goes back and forth in a time slip fashion to show them as refugees in England and to also show them in Syria, fleeing Syria, and showing their journey to England. So right from the off, we know that whilst they may be in some peril and they are searching for a way out and an escape from the terrors that are happening in their own country, we know the outcome of that tale. Firstly, I had a problem with his wife's blindness. I worried that it was going to be used in this metaphorical way that as readers we often see, where a disabled person ends up losing their disability in the end to emphasise how they have changed and how things are becoming better for them, and that now they've reached a safe haven. And I worried that that was going to happen in this book. I ended up researching most of these books whilst I was reading them to check out the context, because I feel like, whilst I don't do it with every book I read, in terms of judging for the Booktube Prize, it's better for me to know a context about the book, about the writer, to better inform my opinions as a judge. That is what I did here. And I discovered that the writer had attended a creative writing course. And immediately it made sense to me, because I have done a creative writing course myself. And the way this book is written felt very much like that. And it didn't feel like these characters were characters. It felt like these characters were set pieces that the writer was using to tell her story. But this meant that the story, again, lost some of its heart, because the writer was so focused on making her writing sound smart that she forgot that the characters still have to feel like characters, and it should never feel like the reader is being forced to feel something. And that's what I felt here. I felt like the writer was trying to make me feel a certain type of way for these characters. It is terrible what these characters are going through. It's terrible that this actually does happen in the world. I just feel like the writer was trying too hard with this book. The next book that I read is A Woman Is No Man by Etaf Rum. What I want to say before I go on is that when I am reviewing these books and offering some sort of critique on them, I am critiquing the words and the way that a writer has told the story. I am not, by in any means, reviewing the subject matter. I believe that the subject of this book, which is domestic abuse within the Palestinian community that is hidden, is a subject that we should be talking about more. Unfortunately, I did not like this book. This is the book that I have been worried about reviewing because I know it's talking about such a sensitive subject. However, from the second paragraph, I ended up disliking this book. You've never heard this story before. No matter how many books you've read, how many tales you know, believe me, no one has ever told you a story like this one. Where I come from, we keep these stories to ourselves. To tell them to the outside world is unheard of, dangerous, the ultimate shame. Now, I did look into the context. I looked into the history of this one because I really did not want to dislike this book. I wanted to be able to tell people to read this book because I think that it's a subject that more people should be knowledgeable of. Unfortunately, with that second paragraph, and this is only related to me, it's related to the fact that when I was at university, I did work experience, and that work experience saw me going and helping to lead writing workshops to women in Salford. And one group of these women were from Palestinian, Pakistani backgrounds. And so I was meeting women who had been through similar situations that the protagonist was going through in this book. It's not my place to tell their stories. Editing Charlie here, just to say that I forgot to actually mention when I read that paragraph, it immediately wrong-footed me because I thought, who are you to tell me what stories I have and haven't heard before? And also, I thought that this was coming from a literary perspective, as though the writer was saying that this is a story that hasn't been fictionalised or shown in any form of media. However, it has. As I read more and I got to the end of this book, I understood what the story was that wasn't being told. But immediately it wrong-footed me. And it had me as the reader going, oh, well, we will see about that. We will see if I've not read this story before. I have seen similar stories to this because of the experiences that I have had in the past with the people that I have met. And I understand that not every single reader is going to have that, and not every reader will know that events like this are happening. And I am aware of the writer's previous experiences. That does not detract from the fact that I wasn't a fan of the way that this story was told. I think that it could have been done better. The reason I dislike this book is not to do with the subject matter, but it's to do with the writing. Similar to all of these books that I have talked about so far today, I don't think that this book had a clear enough focus. Rather than discuss the lives of all the different women within this family, I think the author should have focused in on one of them. I understand why we went into every character's life. I think that my main problem with it was that the story didn't really get started until about 150 pages in. The writer told you how the character felt and how you should feel as the reader. There was no room for the reader to think for themselves. You were constantly being bombarded with this list of emotions, actions, and how you as the reader should feel from that. And I felt like the writer really wanted me to feel something for these characters. And I did, but I didn't need to constantly have what I should be feeling thrown at me. This book would be a good gateway novel. Again, because this book read like young adult fiction to me. Yes, it's dealing with some very serious topics, but at the same time, I think that the writing was quite juvenile. For the most part, a very fast read. And looking into reviewing this, I have gone back, I've read passages again and again, and perhaps when we get into my rankings, I should have ranked it higher. However, I didn't, for the simple fact that I just don't think that the story is told well. All of the characters felt one note. You get told a character is sad, and they are going to remain the sad character throughout. You get told a character is domineering, that character is going to remain domineering throughout. They will never have any sort of action that could be seen any differently, or any moments of lie. If they're an evil character, they're going to remain evil. They could not, there is no room for any sort of differentiation or different take on what the author wants you to believe and wants you to think. The ending irked me, and if anybody else who's read this would like to discuss that, I don't mean the final chapter. I mean the chapter with Dea. The character makes a decision and goes to their grandparents who have raised them. I feel like I understand why the writer wrote it in the way that they did. However, because they wrote it in the way that they did, I ended up feeling like this character, Dea, hadn't really learned anything from what had happened. They'd gone from being somewhat meek, which isn't a problem because of the story that's being told, but they'd used a behaviour that was more domineering and confrontational. I feel like it was out of character. I can't say it without spoiling it. That's what my problem is. But either way, again, didn't like this book. And the final book that I read was The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. This book follows the character of Elwood, who he gets convicted of a crime that he didn't commit, and gets sent to this reformation place, which is going to school him into how to behave better. And obviously, this book is filled with racism, and it's similar to all of these books, discusses more hard-hitting, difficult subjects. This book felt very choppy to me and predictable. There is something of a twist, but again, I feel like anyone who's read any sort of book could predict what happened. I don't really have a lot to say about this book, other than it won a prize recently. I can understand why it won said prize, but personally, I don't feel like the story was fleshed out as much as it ought to be. I feel like Colson Whitehead is a very good writer, and I'd be interested to look at their other works, but at the same time, I just feel like this book lacked something. That's all I really want to say about it. It's, again, a book similar to A Woman Is No Man, in that it deals with some very difficult themes, and I suppose in my rankings you'll hopefully be able to figure out why I ranked it how I did, but I just didn't get it. And that's the same way for all of these books. So I feel like I want to get into the ranking now. The book that placed 6th in my ranking is A Woman Is No Man by Etaf Rum. Whilst this book has been the most controversial for me in that it's the book that I have gone and explored the most, at the end of the day, I just don't think that the writing was there. That's what I'm looking for. I want a strong narrative voice good characters, and I did not get that here. And whilst I appreciate the subject matter and what the writer was trying to do, and I understand the reason this book was written, I get it. I understand it completely. It was at the bottom of my rankings. Next is The Beekeeper of Aleppo. I just don't get it. I don't get why this book is so popular, because to me, it felt incredibly formulaic, and as though the writer was feeling incredibly smart and kind of being a bit all-knowing, omniscient. It felt too clean. I didn't want to see the cogs whirring as much as I could. I could figure this book out. I really knew what the writer was trying to get at, and I didn't like that. Next, I put Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. When I first read this actually began at the bottom of my list, but as I read more of the books, it moved farther up. And just because this book isn't memorable, and all I remember about this was how long this character spent walking down the stairs as we went in and out of the other characters' heads. Next, we had Queenie, because I feel as though it was more accessible than any of the other books, and there was a stronger narrative than any of the bottom three. Next, I put The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, holding up my Kindle because this is how I read it. I'm picking the best from a bad bunch here. This ranked so high because it did better. I didn't dislike this book as much as I disliked other books. So it might be surprising to see that Olive Again is at the top of my rankings. It might be surprising because my top three books were the three books that got thrown out, eliminated this round. And so basically, one thing I would like to say, and I've thought this entire time of having seen how the ranking went last night, the entire time of reading these books, I didn't think that any one of these books was worthy of being awarded the Booktube Prize. I think that give me any of the books that I read for the first round and they would have beaten this. Even the ones that I didn't like, The Dutch House, A Single Thread, any of those books would have done better than these books, because none of them are memorable, none of them are particularly good, and this is the first time round that I just feel like I was really struggling to find anything nice to say about them. I no longer question my opinion as a judge. I think that whilst I got it so wrong, and that the three books that I thought were the worst were the ones that made it through, you need a judge like me. You need someone who's going against the grain, but I won't deny there was this tiny bit of me still that was thinking, well, since I'm going against the consensus, am I really that good of a judge? We search for different things in literature, and what I like, other people won't necessarily like. So I'd be interested to open up the discussion with anybody else who judged Group C in this round about their thoughts. And obviously people had higher opinions of A Woman Is No Man. So I'd be open to discussion about what was it about this book that you enjoyed? Indeed, what was it about any of these books that you enjoyed? Because personally, there isn't a single one here that I would revisit. However, I will be judging the semi-finals as well. I have received my assignment and I only have 2 books this time round to read. It's made my ranking a bit easier. I already know that there are books there that I dislike, but there are books there that I'm hopeful for. One book that I didn't get to judge this round actually got kicked out of the competition, and I wasn't happy about that because I'd really hoped that would go all the way. And them's the books, and them's my rankings, and sadly, once again, I am the contrarian. If you judge the Booktube Prize and have a video up, link it to me in the comments, or I'll probably find it for myself. I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.